everybody. I don't hope, I'm sure that you have liked those who have been at the gala dinner because it was marvelous. No, I shouldn't say so because we organized it, but in fact it was very, very, very nice. And we have reinstated this idea that we are a big family of people who love distribution, no? And that is that we must maintain also in the next years this spirit of being friendly together. I think that is very important. But what is even more important is to do a good job. But I don't know where I am. Sorry, I don't have the program. Give me. Ah, ecco. Perfetto. So I must introduce. So here you know, we have tried to better understand the new rules on vertical agreements through cases, if possible, in order to not to go too far from reality. Silvia did it yesterday, and others also. And now here we have this exclusive and selective distribution where there are important new issues which are arising. And so I would first ask Ginevra Bruzzone, who is now School of European Political Economy. She was at Assonime, which is the Association of the Companies of Italy, a very, very important place, and she has played through the years relationship with the Commission and so, and since I know her since many, many years, she has always been one of the best lawyers in the field of antitrust, because she really understands the heart of the matter every time. And then Sara Capozzi, who has taken a bit her place, I think, in Assonime. But you are now working for the government, no? So, but, and that's a very good sign for our poor Italy with all its problems to have some, but we have some nice and competent people, notwithstanding the appearance, what appears no, of our country sometimes. So I would say the idea is to deal with the problems which go around exclusive and selective distribution. So first, Ginevra will say something about the changing approach, and then we will have, I will chair a nice panel on parallel distribution. How does it work? How can you control parallel sales? Then we have the problem of shared exclusivity, where we don't really understand what the relations between those who share the exclusivity may be or may not be. That is not very clear. And then at the end we have, no, not at the end, but it's too long. So we have the big problem in selective distribution, how you protect the network when there is this stupid principle that you can forbid sales to non-authorized people only in the territory covered. I think that is a bit stupid, but anyhow, they have put it in already in 330. And then one thing I like very much with Maria Elena Giorcelli, the problem, the difficulty of organizing selective distribution networks with exclusive distributors, which is a common practice in many cases in the perfume industry and so, and the Commission says it's forbidden, it's practically forbidden. So that's another thing where we we must see what we can do, and in any case, we must have clear ideas. So thank you very much. Sorry, you know that they criticize me always. No, yes, they always criticize me by saying, Fabio, you speak too much. So I will try, and I give the word to our Ginevra.
So, thank you very much. We're very happy to be here. We are great friends of IDI. And today we will focus on what is new for exclusive and selective distribution in the new vertical package, in order to provide an introduction for the discussion of cases. Let me start.
By problems.
The color is slightly strange, but I hope you can read. Let me start by taking a step back. You remember that in the previous regulations, before the reform at the end of the 90s, we adopted an approach to block exemption regulations based on models. We focused on franchising, exclusive distribution, exclusive supply. With the reform of the 90s and afterwards, we adopted a different approach, whereby we aim at regulating vertical agreements as a general category. No more a model-based approach, but a general approach to vertical agreements. And there are some consequences of this general approach. One, so the approach is based on market share thresholds, restrictions, and so on. One of the main consequences is that since the end of the 90s, selective distribution is covered by the block exemption regulation, provided that you are below the market share thresholds and you do not include hardcore restrictions. And although the approach is general, in the list of hardcore restrictions, we always found references to exclusive distribution and to selective distributions, because we find specific exceptions aimed at protecting these models. The exception for the protection of active sales for exclusive distribution, and the exception for restrictions of sales to unauthorized distributors for selective distribution. And this was the approach since the end of the 90s until today. So, what happened on the market? We had the digital transformation, and companies tried to get a closer control of their distribution models, and as a consequence, they asked for more flexibility in the design of their distribution models. So the Commission consulted, they commissioned an expert report on selective and exclusive distribution agreements, and there are two main issues which emerged from these consultations, specifically on exclusive distribution and selective distribution. One is the use of exclusive distribution was declining. So the issue was, is the approach of the Weber unduly strict? And this was the first question. The second question was, is the integrity of selective distribution systems not sufficiently protected, especially when we look at sales coming from areas not covered by the selective distribution system. And these were the two main policy issues. In the new package, we find, in general, a different approach, whereby we always adopt a general approach to vertical agreements, but the Commission gives more importance to distribution systems. It introduces a definition of exclusive distribution system, and it focuses on selective distribution systems, exclusive distribution system, and pre-distribution systems, which are those systems which are neither selective nor exclusive. And in the list of hardcore restrictions in Article 4, when we look at territorial customer state restrictions, now we find them divided into three parts: one for exclusive distribution systems, one for selective distribution systems, and one for free distribution systems. Moreover, in the guidelines, these systems are no more treated like simple vertical restraints, like non-compete clauses. They are treated as systems, as distribution systems as such. But this is the general approach. Now we will go into more detail on what is new for exclusive distribution and for selective distribution, and we will start with the exclusive distribution, and Sarah, we will discuss this issue.
Yes, thank you. So, as Ginevra, was saying, during the review process, the issue was raised that exclusive distribution was a distribution model that was declining in its use, especially compared to selective distribution, which has become much more used. And the Commission itself has acknowledged that one of the reasons for that might be that under the old rules, the possibilities to restrict active cells were actually too narrow. So in light of this consideration, a few significant changes have been introduced in the Weber to provide more flexibility and to broaden the possibility of granting protection from active cells. This objective has been pursued basically in three ways. First, by introducing the possibility of the so-called shared exclusivity, so that now the safe harbor, the block exemption covers also this situation. Secondly, by removing the previous prohibition to pass on the active cell restriction to the distributor's customers. And third, by codifying in the Weber the definition of active cells. I'll come back to this in a bit more detail in a minute, but before I'll touch upon another novelty. We can go to the next slide, okay. And that is that, the new Article 1 of the Weber now provides the definition of exclusive distribution system, which, as you know, before was also only included in the guidelines. And importantly, in the new definition, the focus is on active cell restrictions, because I'm not going to read it all. You can see on the slide. You can see it on the slide, but it says explicitly that for the purposes of the Weber, an exclusive distribution system is a distribution system where the supplier restricts all its other buyers from actively selling into the territory or the customer groups allocated to exclusive distributors. So in the new regime, the requirement of the parallel imposition by the supplier of active sales restriction on all its other buyers, I mean, not only on the other exclusive distributors, but also on selective and free distributors located in other territories, that this requirement was already there. It's been more explicit in the new text, and more importantly, now becomes an integral part of a legally binding notion, because the definition is now in the Weber, so it's binding for national competition authorities and national courts. And coming back to the other changes I mentioned before, and you can stay on this slide, because as you can see from the definition, now the supplier may exclusively allocate a territory or a customer group to more than one distributor, up to a maximum of 5 distributors per exclusive territory or exclusive customer groups. And this is the so-called shared exclusivity. Next slide. And this has as a consequence that all the appointed distributors can be protected from active sales by all the suppliers' other buyers into their exclusive territories, while at the same time active and passive sales by these distributors within the exclusive territory cannot be restricted. And of course, clearly, the extension of the protection from active cells to the situations of shared exclusivity provides more flexibility for suppliers to better adapt their distribution system to the market circumstances, so that, for example, they don't have, to artificially split the exclusive territory into smaller separate areas just to comply with the requirement of having a single one exclusive distributor. Even though there is no real business need for doing so. So the shared exclusivity allows avoiding this. And as to the number of the exclusive distributors, it's worth recalling that in the original proposal, the notion of shared exclusivity did not specify a maximum number of distributors, but instead was linked to the economic rationale of exclusive distribution, because it referred to a number of distributors determined in proportion to the allocated territory in such a way as to secure a certain volume of business that preserves their investment efforts. So the idea being that the number of distributors should not go beyond what's proportionate to the aim of preserving distributors' incentives to invest. But, however, this approach would have made, the application of the block exemption conditional on the assessment of whether the number of distributors will be proportional or not. So in the final text, the Commission has opted for a more clear-cut rule, for more legal certainty, limiting the block exemption to a maximum fixed number of 5 distributors. And the guidelines explain that above the number, there is an increased risk that exclusive distributors may free ride on each other's investment. So, next slide. And to strengthen the protection from active sales, another important change that has been introduced in the new Article 4 is that regardless the distribution models, suppliers may now require their buyers to pass on the active sale restrictions on the direct customers, that is preventing them from actively selling into exclusive territories or to exclusive customer groups. And as you know, this was not possible before under the old rules. The supplier could enforce the prohibition of active sales only towards its buyer, and this restriction could not be extended to a customer or the buyer, because the customer could not be contractually obliged to impose the same restriction in its own downstream distribution agreement. So in that scenario, the active sale restriction could be easily bypassed because you could have, a kind of fictitious sale just to get over the restriction. And so the new provision allowing the passing on of active sale restriction is aimed at preventing, this risk of circumvention. And you can move to the next slide. And importantly, the possibility of passing on is limited to direct customers. So the supplier may not require its buyers to pass on the active sales restriction to customers further down the distribution chain. And you may recall in what kind of direct customers, because you may recall that in the draft there was a reference that seemed to suggest that the passing on was possible only in the context of a structured distribution network or and long-term distribution agreements. And however, now this reference has been removed from the final text, so the possibility of passing on seems to be more generally recognized. So we wonder whether this means that it is applicable to any purchase, and we see that an issue here might be how to enforce the prohibition depending on the relationship with the customer. So this is our question, for the speakers of the next panels. So next slide. So the last change regards the definition of active sales. It is a crucial notion for the application of the WIBER to exclusive distribution agreements. And the notion used to be provided only in the guidelines. Now it is included in the WIBER, so we have a codified notion that is legally binding for national competition authorities and national courts and applies equally in all member states, so it should ensure a more harmonized approach. And if you look at the substance, you know, the definition has remained very similar to how it was. Of course, it still refers to actively targeting customers, but to some extent provide some clarification about what that actually means. For example, it is clarified that operating a website with a top-level domain or offering on the website language options corresponding to particular territories different from the one in which the seller is established amount to active selling into those territories. So with this on exclusive distribution, I'm handing over to Ginevra, who will talk you through the main changes regarding selective distribution.
What about selective distribution? The definition was already there. Importantly, selective distribution is still block exempted because in the discussion there were some requests for a stricter approach to selective distribution, but fortunately they did not succeed, so selective distribution is still covered by the block exemption, provided that agreements do not contain hard restrictions and the market shares are below 30%. Regardless of the assessment of the nature of the product, nature of the selection of criteria, and whether the selection criteria are published. If you look at the parts of the guidelines in which the Commission discusses how to deal with the selective distribution above the market share thresholds, or where the Commission discusses the possibility to withdraw the benefit of the block exemption for selective distribution agreements, the focus, there is not an approach whereby only based on the metro judgment, whereby selective distribution not complying with the metro requirements should be seen as something intrinsically restrictive of competition. It is more an approach based on the impact of selective distribution on the market, but the focus of the Commission is still very much on the impact on intra-brand competition. So this is the approach which basically remains unchanged. What is new and is extremely important is the enhanced protection for selective distribution agreement, which you find in Article 1 on hardcore restriction. So, because the new Article 4 of the block exemption regulation allows suppliers to prohibit buyers from selling to unauthorized distributors located in a territory where the supplier operates a selective distribution system. And the important part is regardless of whether those buyers are located inside or outside that territory. So even if the buyers are within an exclusive distribution part of the system or in a free distribution part of the system. And importantly, there is a possibility to pass on the restriction. So the supplier can require its buyers to impose the same prohibition on the direct and indirect customers of its buyers. So this is something which is now clear in the WIBER, and it is extremely important because the idea that selective distribution systems means that distributors should be protected from sales to unauthorized distributors previously was problematic because there were some gaps in the system. So there was always the possibility of sales coming from outside the territory covered by selective distribution. Now, with this new formulation of Article 4, in our view, the situation has changed radically. It is much easier to ensure a strong protection of selective distributors. And you can discuss this in the following cases, but the situation now is really, really clear, and in our view, this is one of the novelties in the Weber, which is more important. There is clearly less room for strategic conduct aimed at circumventing the selective distribution system. What remains unchanged is the possibility, the non-possibility to combine exclusive and selective distribution systems within the same territory. The Commission, you have listened yesterday to the colleague from DG Comp, has not changed its position, whereby there have been many requests of please allow consider compatible the combination of an exclusivity at the wholesale level and the selectivity at the retail level. This is common, it is widespread, but the Commission does not want to accept this, because in its idea, the system, wholesale and retail, should be seen as a whole. And if you have a selective distribution system, the only restriction you are allowed to introduce is the provision, the restrictions on sales to unauthorized distributors. You cannot add restrictions on active sales. So the proposal to separate the two levels was not accepted because of the reason of we need to maintain the free flow of goods, basically. So the practical problem, because we can discuss, we can agree, we cannot agree, but the system is there, the position of the Commission is this one. So the practical issue is how can you give sufficient incentives to your wholesalers when you need to organize the selective distribution system at the retail level? The Commission, in a paragraph of the guidelines, paragraph 236, suggests what they do not want is that you protect the wholesalers from active sales. You are still allowed to appoint just one wholesaler in a territory. You are still allowed to impose location clauses. You are still allowed to commit as a supplier not to make any direct sales in the territory allocated to the wholesaler. Is this enough or not? How should you design the system in order to incentivize your wholesaler to make the necessary investments and efforts for designing the retail selective distribution system? And these are questions for the panel. Thank you.
Any questions?
Maybe later on.
We do it
Later on.
No, thank you. I think that you have revolutioned our panel, because
Fabio, scusami, io potrei di farti passare a te le slide se non è un problema.
va bene.
Allora
Sì.
te le lascio qui.
Yes. So, my dear friends, we will see now the timing. This is here. No, this is not. Vediamo di stare qui coi tempi.
Ti do io un altro programma, Fabio, che questo è separato. Qui.
So, you understand that there is a difference. We can prohibit blue trade to sell to Estonia, according to what Ginevra said.
We can discuss this in a second, yes.
So, it's interesting. So, this is... ¿Cómo se hace ahora? Las instrucciones.
Secondo panel di farlo partire, sì. You can project it, okay?
One second.
Yes, sorry. Okay.
Okay.
And you will explain, or you have to...
Yeah.
Oh, this one, guarda, Fabio,
Avanti.
questo.
Huh?
Avanti,
Yes.
avanti, go back.
In,
Either this or this.
oh, better this. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry?
So we can start. I will put the timer, so we know what is happening, because we have organized it in a way that we must stick within certain number of minutes, and I don't know how it will work, but anyhow. So, but why?
You have strict time control.
So you will get the micro when the time is over.
Yes. So we have here this protecting distributors against parallel sales. This idea was born within the first draft, where the clause on passing on was absolutely ununderstandable. Nobody could understand what it meant. And so the idea was we will oblige ourselves to try to understand what it means. Now it is clear it means that you can prohibit direct customers, you can extend the prohibition of active sales. So that is clear, and so we decided to go over to the other aspect. How do you organize it, and how can you protect your territory in a certain way? We have we had three people in our panel, but one of them, Federico Rizzo, unfortunately, he got the COVID, and so he couldn't come. So we are three with Tina Denso. Should you tell what you are? Yes, you're... No, you.
I'm happy to do that. I'm Tina Denso. I'm a partner with the Hamburg-based law firm Brüder Manian in Germany. And yeah.
Okay. And Olivier van Vrijenhoven,
Yes.
Antwerp.
Yes, I'm a Belgian lawyer working for Astria Law, a Belgian-based law firm.
Okay, so we can go on. What is the idea is to have yes?
Is it?
Sorry. Ah, yes, sorry. I am not very good in this mock case. So the idea was we can better understand things if we use a mock case. And so we tried to develop this nice case, which is, I tried to invent something that is not too far from reality, things that happen every day, I think, no? Tina, you agree? You too. So it was not something totally crazy. So then, I don't know this thing, how it works. But, so here we have sorry, because I try to control the time, but this thing doesn't do it in the right way. So are you controlling?
I'm controlling the time.
You control, and you say now we must finish at +6 this presentation.
Still
So.
plenty of time, still 8 minutes to go.
Thank you, Walter.
We do it in parallel universe. So
We don't speak about Federico. Very sorry, because he has a very, very interesting experience in distribution and so. So we the companies involved. So I have invented this name. Sunny Day is an Italian company selling high quality sunglasses. They have exclusive distributors importance in a number of countries. You will see it here. These red countries, they don't have exclusive distributors in the gray countries. And why?
And the green countries,
And then there are countries where they don't even sell, but they are outside the community, so this is now not. So they have this mixed network because they cannot cover everything, and in the other countries where they have no distributors, they sell, but they oblige the companies not to export into countries which are protected in a certain way. Gloria Trading, this is Olivier. You can tell the position, what it does.
So I'm a Belgian-based company. So despite the good weather in Belgium, we are very successful in selling sunglasses to many premium resellers in Belgium. So I have a sort of exclusivity in Belgium. And we are selling the products to premium resellers, opticians, corner and department stores, and that's it.
and you're also selling to Blue Trade, which is
Yes.
It's true.
my company, and we're also in Belgium because we think the weather is great there. But because it's not that great, we have the website aiming at the German and the French market, and we do very aggressive sales there via our online web services. And then we have also this customer, MB Optical, a German company that has a Estonian subsidiary, to confuse you. And we are also selling partly to MB Optical. That'll come later, but that's also a player in this little setup. So to Belgium, you're the exclusive distributor. We are just a buyer who's operating the website for the German and the French market.
So Tina represents the bad guys, but from a certain point of view, the useful guys who make more competition, no? So
We are the
now
one the Commission wants to protect.
we can go on. You have seen this situation, which is not an exceptional situation. It's something that happens very, very often. So, Olivier, you can say 2 words about how before the Weber, how the Sunny Days distribution network was organized.
So, yes. So, like any producent, at a certain moment you try to streamline and to structure the distribution of your products. And for our case, we have decided to set up an exclusive distribution network in a number of countries. We have appointed existing customers or existing buyers, and we have granted them exclusivity. And of course, in such a system, you include in your contracts legal provisions prohibiting them from selling the products to buyers located in territories which are exclusively granted to another distributors. And in the countries where we didn't identify a partner or distributors, of course I have customers, I have buyers, and I don't want to lose the revenue, so I'm keeping selling the products to these buyers, but I have a condition, that is that these guys are not selling the product to exclusive territories. So basically it's a very typical distribution system.
Okay, so that is the situation before the Weber. And what happens in this, during this period, there is the bad guy, you, Tina, no?
So
they,
Gloria sells to
No,
Sunny
the-
Day sells to Gloria as the exclusive distributor in Belgium under the conditions that you just explained. But since I'm just a customer, not of Sunny Day, but of Gloria, I'm quite free to do whatever I want to do. So we put up this website because we found the weather is really great in Germany, better than in Belgium, and even better in France. And we're getting very good conditions from Gloria, so we can aggressively have a good pricing policy for our online shops. And we're offering at conditions that are not really compatible to the German and the French distributors, direct distributors of Gloria. We also have this company, MB Optical, a German company, and we do a lot of large quantity sales of the sunglasses to them, which we don't know what they are doing with that, and we're not interested.
So I think Gloria is not happy because Blue Trade is able to supply others at lower prices because they renounce to a part of their end of their margin, and this is very dangerous for the network, because of course when you can find on the internet advertising with prices which are higher than the prices you get in the shop, everything becomes difficult. And so at this point, the German and French exclusive distributors say, but that's not nice. You should do something about this. You must prohibit Blue Trade to sell in our territories. And then, of course, Blue Trade says, but there is no obligation. It's clear in Regulation 330, no, 330, yes. It is clearly stated that you cannot impose limitation on your clients, on your customers. And so, nothing to do. And now, at this point, the new Weber enters into force. And here, there is a new situation, because, as you know, Article 4b(1) exempts the restriction of active sales by the exclusive distributor and its direct customers into a territory or to a customer group reserved to the supplier or allocated to others. So Sunny Days then forces his distributors to accept a new clause in their contract, which says the distributor hereby agrees to refrain from and to require its direct customers to refrain from any active sales to purchasers established in countries where other distributors are appointed. So at this point, Blue Trade cannot continue selling actively in Germany and France. So these were certainly active sales, a promotion directed to these markets. This was no more possible. So at this point, there is an attempt to bypass all this through an Estonian company, which perhaps didn't even exist before. But this MB Optical has established a company in Estonia, which, as you have seen is not covered, is not exclusive, has only some people buying sometimes, with the obligation not to go to other territories. And so,
So yes,
yes.
we are not happy with the new agreement that Gloria imposed on us, but certainly we couldn't do anything, otherwise we wouldn't have been delivered anymore. Yeah, so we can't continue our online sales, which is bad, but we still remember that we have MB Optical in Germany, and they actually approach us and ask us that we deliver products to its Estonian affiliates, which is the question really that at this point let's assume for the second we didn't know anything about the Estonian company and they really approach us, MB Optical, old customer of ours, to now sell to the Estonian company, and we are happy to do that because that falls outside any of the territories that are covered. So we are free to do that, and we deliver them. On request of the German company, we deliver to the Estonian company that asks us for delivery, really. Now, what happens is MB Optical now, that is not bound by any of the restrictions, of the new restrictions, starts to aggressively promote what we did before in Germany and French, because they happen to find that that's a good market, and they do online or offline
And for
sales.
blue trade, the situation doesn't change very much because they had to make low prices to be able to directly sell to Germany and France. Now they make the same or even lower prices, renouncing to a part of the margin to this other company. And so for them it's always an interesting business because they can do great quantities of sales and get better conditions for the quantity discounts and things like that. And so it is something that is okay. But slides, sorry. Yes. So
Already the next one.
what can we do? What can we do?
The next one.
The next one, yes. Sorry, I am a bit sorry. I'm not very efficient at this point. But yesterday it was so nice. So at this point, sunny day is asking itself, but what can I do to overcome these situations? And they imagine two solutions. The first one, which we will see is not very practicable, is Sunny Day expressly reserves the remaining EU countries for itself. And so they can prohibit blue trade to actively sell into Estonia and then to supply to the Estonian company, which then gives the goods to MB Optical. And the other way, which is more efficient, more functional, but rather difficult, as we will see, is to transform its whole network into a selective distribution system. This is important to study this alternative because that is the way that has been used by many companies to overcome these problems and to have a stricter control on the network. So let us see the first option. So the first option.
That's for me.
Yes, that's for you. Okay.
If you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. You know, I speak too much, but I will try to control myself.
So the problem here is indeed that Estonian is not an exclusive territory, so I cannot prevent blue trade from actively selling in this territory. So the first option I have indeed is that I can reserve the territory for myself as a supplier. And the first question I would have is, do I need to be commercially active on the territory. And there, the answer is clear in the guidelines, 102. No, you don't need to be commercially active in the territory. You can just reserve this territory to allocate it later on to distributors. Of course, I have a couple of comments on that. I think that if you go for this solution, you need to be a little bit careful, because it sounds a little bit too easy to me to just say, okay, I reserve this territory for myself and I don't do anything there. So at least if you only have one territory, it could work, but let's assume that you would do this for 20 European countries, you don't have the intention to really be active or to appoint a distributor there, then I think that it wouldn't work. So I think that if you go for this option, in my opinion, you would need a sort of evidence, for example, a business plan, evidencing that you have some plan to be commercially active in this territory, or at least that you want to appoint distributors in the future, and I would say in a reasonable period of time. So that's the first...
May I interrupt you?
Yes,
I think,
of
sorry,
course.
you are right, but if you don't fear that somebody comes and looks at your papers, then the solution of reserving the whole union as a standard clause is better than nothing.
Absolutely.
And it may be that they do not see it, overlook it, and so. But of course, you must know that it is not. It doesn't
not worth
work
the time.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's the last way, the last possibility. Sometimes
Yeah.
you can do better.
And of course, the other problem is the problem of passive sales, because the restriction only concern the active sales. So I'm to some extent stuck with the passive sale, and it leads us, I think, to the next slide and the next
Yes.
possibility, and that's for Tina.
Yeah, but
So
maybe
we
just
have discussed this possibility, and I have now inserted this new slide, imagining a new situation, a different situation, where MB Optical has very good relations with Blue Trade. And MB Optical says, I want to take over the business of Blue Trade. Can you help me through our Estonian company? And so the problem is, if there is an agreement behind it to overcome the prohibition, to overcome the difficulty, what happens, Tina? Do you want...
Yeah, the question really is if do I actively sell if the German company approaches me asking me whether I could deliver to Estonia or not. And the guidelines, they have the definition of passive sales, and that means that sales made in response to unsolicited requests from individual customers. Is this an unsolicited request or not? If I know or not know what's going on with MB Optical in the Estonian company, and then going back to the French and the German market. Is it an issue of active or passive sales that arises here, or is it a question of the qualification of this, not the qualification of the sales, but like a circumvention or an abuse or collusive action between me and between MB, Blue Trade and MB Optical. We discussed this, and I personally would say there's a strong connotation that if I'm aware of all this, what's going on, and this is a clear circumvention, and it might even be that this would not even be regarded as a passive sale because it's not really an unsolicited request, is it?
But I think also from my experience that if you want to target Blue Trade, it's not be so easy. It's not so easy because first of all, you need to collect some evidence that there are arrangements between Blue Trade and MB Opticals. That's always difficult to prove. And for me also the other point is that you need some active collaboration from your Belgian distributors, because it has then to take action against its own customer, Blue Trade. And in my experience, it's always difficult to push a distributor to just take action against a very good customer. So I think it's difficult. So I I think we discussed that there might be another option, and the other option might be to target MB optical. And we could use the following reasoning to say, look, you can tell MB optical that you have set up an exclusive distribution system, that Germany is allocated to an exclusive distributor. And there is a contract between the Belgian distributor and Blue Trade. And pursuant to this contract, Blue Trade is prohibited from actively selling in Germany, but also in Estonia. So you could then try to convince a court that MB Optical is really helping Blue Trade to circumvent the system. And based also on the history, the fact that Blue Trade was selling to German resellers, you could, I think, have an argument to target MB Optical, and it could be more efficient than targeting Blue Trade, and maybe easier.
You can target both, perhaps.
You can both. So it's sort of
and say, of course,
third-party
it's difficult
liability.
to prove. Yeah, can we?
Okay. So the ground for that action, would that be, I don't know.
Third-party liability.
Yeah.
Just general tort obligation. Yeah.
It's
that
very hard to prove in many member states, and in some of them, I mean, you really have a hard time using that argument also in selective distribution systems, and
Yes,
which
we are
is the
going now.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
we have used this argument in selective distribution system with
in
some
which
success.
country?
In Belgium.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it is successful in Italy. You can't use it that much in the Netherlands. I've
In
tried.
the Netherlands, I think that Walter was successful in a number of cases.
Well, we've tried in the Netherlands in the past years. No, it wasn't with Uthoff, but it was in a scenario of selective distribution. So not always the courts are so open to accept that argument, and I think the most difficult part is to prove all
I
the
agree.
causes, and especially if you have goods that are not traceable per se. So either you have a tracking system within the product, or you're basically done.
Okay.
I agree with.
We understand that it's a difficult way, this one, and so Sunny.
Can I just briefly,
Yes,
because
yes.
of the reserved territories, we discussed this about that I, as Blue Trade, I would say, you know, you can't just reserve all of Europe. I spoke to Johannes Holzwart yesterday about whether the Commission had any thoughts about how long a reservation must be, or if there's a time when, you know, this turns into open again. He said, no, why, reserve, you can reserve for as long as you want to. They didn't look at it from this angle. They said, why should a supplier reserve a country if they're not interested in doing something there? So they didn't see this issue. But I think it will be an issue, because from Blue Trade's perspective, I would say this is a not allowed or not exempted prohibition of competition. But Johannes Holzwarth's position, but that was not the position of the Commission, he said they didn't think about it from that perspective, so that was not an issue.
I think that is an important question, but we must remember that the position of the Commission on reserving territories is different from exclusive distribution, where they have this very open-minded approach, saying you reserve it for the future, and selective distribution, where they say you can only forbid sales to people where the distribution system is operated. And here they made a big change, and sometimes something remained in the guidelines, so it's not very, very clear how this should be interpreted, but the idea is that there is a more closed approach to this. So we can go over to the selective distribution, the idea, which is very difficult. So we have tried to imagine a possible situation where Sunny Days uses its distributors in the exclusive areas to create a selective distribution system. So they are not organizing the selective distribution directly because they are not able, they don't have the force to do it. And they tell the distributors, please choose your best customers, your high-profile customers, and enter with them into contracts of selective distribution in my name, probably. So I will be the supplier, but you will do everything. You will choose them, you will control them, you will manage them. And at this point, I have created a selective distribution system in the countries where I had already my exclusive distribution. What shall I do in the other countries? And here the idea was, okay, I supply some people, I try to reserve them, but I don't know if it will work. And when I supply somebody, I tell him not to sell to any non-authorized not selected distributor. So if Sunny Day can, no, the first solution is Sunny Day makes directly selective distribution contracts with the few people it's selling to in the other countries. So, but it's a bit complicated probably to organize, too heavy for a smaller company. Anyhow, if they do it, then at this point there should be, at least in the EU, nobody who can get the products and make parallel sales. And they have all the obligation not to sell to traders that do not belong to the network. As regards products that may be imported from outside the EU, we didn't enter into the question. Anyhow, there you have other means that can help you, protect you. And so this is...
You go to the next slide.
Yes?
Maybe you go to the next slide in view of
I
time.
go to the next slide,
And then we-
because here we have only understood it's something a bit heavy. And here the idea of covering only one part of, I think this, how much time do we still have?
None.
No?
We are running out of time.
We are running, we are running
We have
out.
another 2 minutes.
So I will tell you what it is, and then we will have a small discussion about how it is possible. So the alternative solution is that Sunny Day would continue selling to non-exclusive and non-selected distributors, free distributors in the countries where the system is not operated. And these free distributors would accept the obligation to refrain from selling to non-members. However, the free distributors would remain free to sell to independent traders in the territory not covered. So what do you do? And
So this is really, again,
this is
about
really
the question of
the big
reserving
problem.
territories, or how far can you reach with the selective distribution system. But the advantage of the selective distribution system is that you can prohibit passive sales, and that makes it easier in this little example we had, where there's a collusive collaboration to circumvent via non-covered countries to try to circumvent the active sale prohibition. But the question here again will be, what about the reserved countries? What about the countries that are not part of the selective distribution network? And I understand there will be a panel that discusses a little bit more about the selective distribution network. So
what can you do? You can try to reserve them, but you know that it is probably not effective since the Commission says it must be covered. If it's not covered, you cannot reserve it. There was something in the guidelines.
Yeah, there is some kind of a contradiction between the text of the block exemptions, or Article
Yes,
4C2
and the guideline.
refers to the territory where the system is operated, while in the guidelines 143 they refer to a territory reserved by the supplier to operate the system. So it's not the same. But of course, the text of the block exemption refers to system which is operated. So, but there is a kind of contradiction there between the guidelines and the block exemption itself.
So I think that we have two big issues. One issue is how can I protect my exclusive distributors from competition between them, because of course, and this will be treated later, this problem, which is an existing problem. I can close my eyes and I can tell my distributors with whom I have a very close relationship, please remember, don't go to the territory of your colleagues because it's stupid, it's against the interest of you and of everybody. Second problem, which was this, where the system is operated. Of course, you can tell you have a great power of convincing the members of a selective network. So when something is not possible legally, you can avoid the problem by convincing your people. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say these things in public, but in practice it is like that, and this is one of the reasons why you use a selective distribution. It's also the members of the network understand that it is now in their interest to leave too much
Not
space.
all the members, I'm afraid.
Not all.
Yeah, not all the members.
Of course.
Yeah.
And then you are forced to work on a level which is not nice. And this comes from the fact that I think that the limitation to the countries where the system is operated, I would ask Ginevra what she thinks. I think it's from an antitrust perspective, it's wrong, it's exaggerated, this limitation. You should be free to say you cannot sell to any non-member of the network in any country. You should never sell to people who are not in the network, to traders, independent traders. I don't know. I think they have been a bit too strict. I don't see the antitrust reason for this. But this is a bit because there is a part of the people of the Commission, I don't say the Germans, also the Germans, who are a bit theoretical. You see it also on the problem of dual distribution.
Is not here.
And then
Thanks.
you follow a general abstract idea, and you forget a bit what happens in the real world. And that is a bit a problem sometimes, I think. We see it also in dual distribution. I don't understand all these distinctions. I think that if you have a network where you have where you are selling on the internet and you have a distribution network at the same time, of course you must be free to do whatever you want in order to agree within your own distribution system what you want, in the interest of both of them, because if they are not happy, it doesn't work. So I have this impression we must try to overcome, but of course, why are we here? We must understand what is legal and what is not legal. And then once we know it well, we can try to find the way out. No, there is
I
no...
think we are
I think
over
we are
time,
over time,
really.
and I think
Okay.
we still have so many panels that we're
Sorry,
discussing along
one
this
last
line.
word. The same problem for price, how do you say, price obligation to respect the sales price. That is too something where if it doesn't work, if it's too dangerous for the network, you must have a way to do something, even if it's strictly forbidden. So, sorry, because the network doesn't work otherwise. So, sorry, nobody has heard what I have said. I am not inviting you to breach the law. No, but simply. Okay. Thank you very much. So. Ma vabbè, resto qui.
Allora ti lascio qua, ti faccio solo cambiare, ti prendo il tuo bicchiere e la tua acqua qua.
Ah no, qua?
No,
E
e Walter sta qua.
Walter, sit down.
On your presentation, so please sit here. The technician just
Sit down.
after you.
But there's also a
Oh, I have here. Yeah, yeah, good.
Voilà.
Excellent.
Okay. So, 10:30, what time is it?
We'll try to finish within 1 minute.
We have been too long, but was it interesting anyhow? That's an important thing. Okay. So,
Yeah. So the
can I introduce you?
yeah, you can introduce me.
This is Walter van Overbeek from Amsterdam, and sorry, yeah. He will deal with this topic. I only wanted to introduce what for me is the basic problem in this shared exclusivity. In my opinion, and perhaps I am wrong, it makes little sense to share exclusivity between different distributors in the same territory without having some division of roles. That it's almost impossible that they are strictly in competition between them. There must be something. You will concentrate on that, you will concentrate on, only that you do it in a flexible way, at least in my experience, that is what happens in many cases. And so the big problem is, but how can they govern this market, or how can I as supplier govern this market in a way that is effective for everybody? And sometimes simply saying, you must compete with each other and nothing more, I think it doesn't make much sense. And so this is, in my opinion, the heart of the problem. Now we will see how you look at the problem, and sorry for having interfered in the beginning. Okay.
No problem. I'm very well prepared for this panel. We had a lot of beer yesterday, so, and this is the beer case. The facts. So they ask a Dutch guy to talk about Belgian beer company. There's a Belgian beer manufacturer who sells on the German market, has a wholesaler there. And the wholesaler is very successful in selling the beer to supermarkets, but very occasionally sells beers to the pubs and horeca. And the Belgian beer manufacturer thinks, well, we should be able to increase our sales on the German market. Why don't we appoint a second wholesaler whose prime task it should be to focus on the horeca business instead of the supermarkets? I already have a guy who does that very well. I don't want I want someone else to focus on a different part of the market. So in that case, I do understand where you come from when you say, well, the division of task and sharing of exclusivity. I think it plays out a little different. There's a wish list, as I noted down on this slide. First of all, the wish of the Belgian beer manufacturer is that each wholesaler, so A and B, they all focus on their own market. So one on the supermarkets and the other on the HoReCa. Second wish is that basically the new wholesaler stays away from the customers of the other, and the other stays away from the customer of the new wholesaler, so that there's no active sales into the other customer group. And there is a suggestion, and I have the feeling that it's your suggestion. There's a suggestion that the wholesalers have a very good relationship and that they exchange customers if they feel that they're better served by the other. So if the supermarket wholesaler receives a customer, or he still has a few who focus on the HoReCa business, that he drinks a cup of coffee with the new wholesaler and say, why don't you take those customers, and etc. So that is the basic layout of the case. Now I put some slides on the law, but I think first of all time, and second, most of what I wrote down is already covered by this morning. So I can be relatively quick. There's now the description of exclusive distribution in the VBER. I think it's interesting to see, when it comes to customer groups, how do you define them? How do you define customer groups? So that is something that I will talk about. Another one that's very relevant for this case is, can we make a combination? Can we say we want you, the wholesaler A, to focus on German supermarkets, so that's territory and customer group, or do we need to make a choice? Is it Germany, or is it a certain customer group? Or can we make the combination? If we can't make it, we cannot execute the plan. And I thought it would be interesting to cover the three conditions, which I don't need to do anymore because most of that has already been discussed. So I will say nothing about the exclusivity condition. The parallel imposition requirement is also already covered. And the rolling over prohibition is in fact also covered. So I can fairly quickly move to what I see as the solution. First of all, how do you define the customer group? I think if you look at the old guidelines, you needed to adopt quite objective criteria to define the customer group. And of course, it's fairly easy to say supermarkets on the one hand and HoReCa business on the other. That's relatively easy. But it's more difficult when it comes to the existing HoReCa customers of the supermarket wholesaler. So the existing wholesaler still has a few customers that he generated occasionally, but they're still his customers. So how do you define those customers? I'm not so sure if under the old VBER it would be possible to just put a list, add a list to your contract and say, well, it's supermarkets plus these 10 HoReCa businesses. And on the other hand, I think if you look at the new guidelines, that would seem to be much easier. Because the Commission writes down, you can use a list of identified customers. So you just ask wholesaler A, so who are your customers? Give me the names, and I can either appoint a new wholesaler and say, you can actively sell to the HoReCa business, with the exception of those 10 existing customers who are of wholesaler A. I don't want you to actively sell to them. If they come to you, that's fine, passive sales. But I don't want you to actively approach those existing.
But you do it with a separate contract. Then
No, just an attachment to the contract of the new wholesaler. Yeah, the wholesaler B.
Within within the system of shared exclusivity.
Let's
okay.
let's take that.
Sorry
Um,
for interrupting.
No, but I mean, if you see here, the Commission is very, the whole objectivity element seemed to have been lost. And you can now just, as a matter of fact, you can also have an exclusive distribution system with only one customer. And I understand that that is a situation where you have a deal with one customer, a public procurement case, and you want only one of your dealers or distributors to sell to the winner of the procurement, for instance. So lots of let's say space to do what we want. The second issue that we needed to cover was, is it possible to combine the exclusive customer group and the territory? If you look at the regulation, like the old regulation, it says or, so as if you have to make the choice. You can make exclusive, you can appoint an exclusive distributor for either a territory or a group of customers. So this is the word or in the block exemption. If you look, however, in the guidelines, it's quite clear you can combine. And I think that was always the situation. So it's a bit strange that they write down or, and in the guidelines they say, well, in fact, what in my language we would say and dash or, but anyway. So it's possible to say, okay, wholesaler A, you are going to do the German supermarkets. Wholesaler B, you're going to do the German HoReCa business. No problem. And I don't see that as a case of shared exclusivity. They're both exclusive distributors, but they don't share. There's a line between them. It's not that they both have these elements. No, one is here and the other is there. So it's not a sharing of exclusivity. But of course, the question is, I don't know. I mean, we can't ask the Belgian beer distributor because he's a beer manufacturer because he's not here. But the question is, what are we going to do with these few customers that are the existing customers of the existing wholesaler A? And how are we going to deal with those customers? Are we going to say, I don't want the new distributor to actively sell to them, or are we going to say we're going to share the exclusivity of those customers, and then let the market decide where they're going? Probably in the end they will go to the new distributor because he's able to provide much better service to this HoReCa business, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. That's a question of. I mean, both options are available, I would say. And so I don't know what they want to do. So as I said before, I had a few slides on these three conditions for exclusive distribution, and as it has already been covered, I don't think it makes much use to cover them here, although they are often forgotten. So if you look here at the way in which we would probably advise the Belgian beer manufacturer is to allocate the supermarket business in Germany to wholesaler A and the HoReCa customer group to wholesaler B. What are we going to do with these customers that are still, in fact, in the wrong side? The HoReCa customers that are still served by wholesaler A? I think there's two options. Either you single them out and say, I don't want wholesaler B to actively sell to them, or you say, as I said before, we create a shared exclusivity for those customers. I don't know, it depends what the client wants. What is not possible, however, is the last suggestion, I think, that you say, why don't you, among yourself, decide which customer, you know, you sort of divide the market, divide the customers, and say, hey, this is a customer that's yours, and I get something from you. I find that a horizontal agreement, which is probably has an effect to either to separate these markets in a way that would not be allowed. I would never advise to put anything in writing. I may have a cup of coffee with the wholesaler A, but I don't really understand either why wholesaler A would have a problem. Of course, he has some customers there that he's been serving, but yeah, the biggest problem in practice probably is how to adopt the new system, how to implement it, because yeah, you go to wholesaler A, and then you have to convince him of the benefits, and I think probably at some point you need to play hardball and say, well, it's either my way or the highway. I mean, you're doing well in the supermarket, but if he's doing extremely well, he's probably not going to be so much worried about it. So it may be not so easy to implement it. I find it more an implementation case, and there's a lot of convincing to do, because yeah, there's going to be another player on the German market, and you never know what these supermarkets are going to do. These are large customers, and they may well decide to go to the new wholesaler. So in my experience, wholesaler A will probably not be very happy with this scenario, and we'll have to write a few nasty letters, I guess. So that was basically the case as I saw it, but perhaps
Thank you.
Somebody else.
It's very. I have only one question. I think the basic issue is, can you do it in a flexible way by not dividing territories or customers, by not giving strict rules, and simply saying you are together on the same market, you will concentrate on this and you will concentrate on that. But there is no clear obligation. It's something that you must manage between you. Do you think that this would be possible, would be admitted, even if I say you concentrate on that and you concentrate on that other, but you have no strict obligations? Or you say, if you get a new customer, and if it's in your field, or let us say that you don't divide the rows, if you get a new customer, please respect this and don't go into customers that are already with the other party. These are all market restrictions, competitive restrictions between them, but they are totally normal and understandable. They do not do, I think, any harm to competition. We are speaking about competition within distribution at an intra-brand situation, so something really where I think it makes no sense to have problems.
No,
in my opinion, you should be free to organize this. The only thing you cannot dictate straight rules unless you divide the markets and you say you have an exclusivity for this and you have an exclusivity for that, so it becomes practically two contracts.
No,
I don't know.
I understand your point. In fact, basically you're saying, why don't you make Germany as a shared exclusivity between the two wholesalers and let them decide who does what? It is, I'm not saying it's not possible. I would never advise this, because basically what you're saying is that I would, instead of, let's say, giving in a vertical relationship, decide how you want it to be arranged. Now you're going to say, I'll leave it up to you guys, and you do whatever you want. make all kinds of horizontal agreements about territories, and you do the north of Germany and I do the south and stuff like that. I would never do this. I would save them from a lot of trouble by making it very clear. And I already don't like the few customers that are of wholesaler A, because you already have some, but that's how it is, how life is sometimes. But now we're going to get a new situation, and I would always advise to be very clear, and in a vertical relationship, that's no problem at all. But yeah, you can of course get the same effect from the horizontal situation. But yeah, that's from a competition law perspective completely different.
The big problem is a commercial problem, is how to convince commercial people of thinking in a too legal way. They prefer things, and so sometimes you have to accept their point of view, because they know how to sell better on the market.
Yeah, but I mean, from that, here you have someone who I presume has exclusivity for Germany, and now we're going to appoint someone else. So that in itself is already.
No, then of course.
But that in itself is already a problem.
Yes, but I imagine my commercial man who goes and says, yes, we will do like this, like that. He doesn't want to dictate strict rules, and now you are here and you are there. And so, I don't know, I've seen many situations of this type where there are more distributors in the same region, and there are non-written rules which decide who goes where. And it works practically, if they have good relations. Of course, if they are fighting each other, then it doesn't work. And then you must have very strict rules. Yes, you wanted?
If I ask apologies, because I'm now an English common law lawyer, and as a result of Brexit, apparently I'm not able to think about the VIBA. But it seems to me that what we have is a situation where if a supplier says to wholesaler A, why don't you focus on this? And the supplier says to wholesaler B, why don't you focus on this? And they agree to do so, each with the supplier. Have we not created, in effect, an implied arrangement between A and B, which is going to be, so far as I can see it, horizontal? We don't need an agreement. We don't need it to be express, but I struggle to see how we have not got an implied horizontal arrangement. Not an agreement, an arrangement.
Yeah,
but
what do you want?
Does it matter that there is a horizontal agreement between two distributors which are distributing the same brand and which are obliged practically to push the sales? I don't see. I see it only as a theoretical problem, but not as a practical problem in that condition.
I agree we need to be commercial, but if Johannes was here, I would be asking him, did he think perhaps it might concern the Commission that we have now as horizontal arrangement?
I don't like horizontal arrangements.
Yes,
just,
please.
Martine de Koning from Amsterdam, Kennedy van der Laan. I tend to agree with you. I think it looks a bit like a hub and spoke cartel. But if it really is at the initiative of the supplier, I mean, he can do territories, he can do customer groups, then really it should be viewed as a vertical. But always there's the difference between the active and the passive sales, so it will never be watertight anyway. And regarding the implementation, I totally agree with Walter. It's going to be very difficult. You need to open up an existing agreement either by terminating, offering something new.
Can I ask Ginevra what she thinks? What do you think of my idea that it's exaggerating the making a problem of horizontal within this type of framework, or do you agree that there is a problem?
I tend to agree with Martina. It is slightly dangerous from an antitrust viewpoint. So it's better to keep the vertical element in the arrangement, because with the vertical element, the Commission or competition authorities can accept justification for some kind of exclusivity or soft exclusivity, whereas if you introduce something which can be perceived as a market sharing horizontal arrangement, they will never accept it.
So
even
you,
if
you
introduce
cannot make happy your commercial people by saying, yes, do it quietly in this way, and we have the work as lawyers to define better, so we have more to do and more money to earn, and they are not too unhappy because we help them. Because I always have the problem of trying to understand the needs of those who are on the market and who do not understand our preoccupations, our problems.
I had something. The same idea of shared exclusivity gives the sense, because the idea is either you have true exclusive, many exclusive distributors, or you have shared exclusivity, and in the mind of the Commission, shared exclusivity means an area in which there are a limited number of people who compete among themselves and are protected from outside, but they compete among themselves. This is the idea of shared exclusivity. So they choose either exclusivity in a narrow sense or competition within the shared exclusivity area.
So this is a very important conclusion. If we think there is a need of dividing rows between them, it's better that we make two separate agreements with each of them, and that we don't delegate it to their common sense, as in many cases my clients would like, because they have that view, and I always ask myself to what extent I can follow what they want because they know how to govern the market, and to what extent I should insist on rules that are a bit more complicated for them. But so we come to that conclusion. I think it's very interesting. Okay.
One last question. Maybe not exactly on this the same issue, but I was wondering, what about agreements where the seller grants exclusivity on only parts of its products and the rest is going to be non-exclusive? Do you think that that would work as well? And do you need to have the same products to be exclusive in all countries?
It's a lot of work, but it's possible. I mean, you need to have separate agreements then, or at least in your agreement make a separation, where part of it is exclusive and the other part is not. I mean, I see that in practice very often, that clients have a new product, a niche product, for instance, which they do not want to give to all their customers, all their distributors. So they make a new agreement with only a few of them to see how it works and if it's successful, you know. So there's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah. Which is very interesting for us, but not very interesting for them.
Yeah, but
so there's a practical problem.
I don't know, maybe also a culture thing, because I think probably in Germany and in Holland, we would like the paper because then we can control it. Then we can say, hey, this is a rule, you're breaching that rule. Whereas if I leave it up to, you know, then what do I do if things happen that I don't like?
I'm Italian and you are Dutch, so
exactly.
It's also a difference of approach.
Exactly.
Anyhow, I think that we are a bit late.
We have one more question.
One more question, the last one.
Hello. No, I was wondering whether we could consider giving to wholesaler A an indemnity to compensate the possible loss of its clients in portfolio Horeca by, asking him not to perceive active sales with them.
I'm surprised to hear that from you.
I'm multifaceted.
My clients never want to pay for that type of because if you consider it, well, how much are you going to pay? How is that going to work out? I mean, of course, I come from a jurisdiction where we don't pay any goodwill in distribution relationships. Yeah, so.
Well, I don't. That's the.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, so I don't. First of all, I would never. None of my clients would ever ask this question. But no, I do understand.
Commercially, that
yeah,
would be
no,
a way to try to streamline.
Of course,
more.
it is I think it's a possibility because, particularly if you need to convince someone to accept someone alongside him on the German market, and then you say, well, I'm willing to compensate you in some sort of way for you then to sign a new agreement. It's a sort of an exit arrangement. Partly, it could work. Yeah.
Okay. I think within 5 minutes we should have finished the coffee break. So I propose.
Io ho detto che potremmo ritardarlo di mezz'ora, io gliel'ho già detto a quelli del coffee break, però diglielo che magari un quarto d'ora soltanto meglio.
Un quarto d'ora.
Un quarto d'ora, un quarto d'ora.
Sorry, can we limit the coffee break to 15 minutes? Because we are a bit late. Okay, so till 11:30 we continue here. Ok. Bene. Andava bene, ho fatto troppo casino.
that's also the amount of chairs. So they sort of thought everyone will want to talk about Uber.
Very smart.
Yeah.
Can also say
Yeah, and also
She made, yes, it's a choice. And she made the choice to go to study to become a teacher. That was so difficult. Yes. So, and she has an exam.
half an hour, or is we're starting 20 minutes late?
That's a good question. Let's try to have a half an hour. What about Fabio?
Yes, I'm having that too.
It's so funny, he has really no sense of
Actually, you
time.
now have glasses that
Not at all.
He has the sense of when the discussion is interesting.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Today, yes.
Remember this one time where I had to catch a plane, and I was in the last slot, and I had something that I had to do on my own, like the previous speaker. So many people. I was looking at the clock. I was like, I'm gonna miss my flight, and I had to go to a wedding or something, family related.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I remember delivering the speech, taking.
Welcome everybody to this second part. So now we have, we have this one. Protecting a selective distribution network that covers only part of the EU against sales by unauthorized distributors. This is always has been a big a big problem, because the Commission has this strange view that you can prohibit sales to non-members of the network only within the territory covered by the network, which in my opinion is stupid, has no real reason from the antitrust point of view, and it was not like that in the previous regulation before 330. Anyhow, this creates, of course, big problems of risk that goods go to a country which is not covered and then come back, and so you can destroy the network. Of course, it's not so terrible, but if you have people within the network who are willing to do that, so it's always possible. And so we have here Martin de Koning, a lawyer from Amsterdam, well known as specialist in all these matters. Carsten Metzlaff, Berlin, also a specialist. Erik Montens, Cover Morning, okay. And Maria. No, I don't.
I'm here because I'm beautiful.
So, and then at the end, Maria Rosa Musotto, Porsche, Italy, which is also interesting, certainly. So I think I am very happy to hear from you what you are going to do. So you are, Martin, you are the chair, so you begin and I listen. And I will not speak too much, so they don't tell me that I am always speaking too much.
All right, thank you very much, Fabio. So we have a little agenda. It's very easy. We talk a little bit about an introduction, and I will explain to you about the case study that we would like to talk you through. We have a panel discussion, and at the end we have some questions that go maybe slightly beyond the topic of this case, but could be interesting to explore going forward. So looking at the case. The case is about a Danish company. Danish Retail has established a selective distribution network across the EU, except for 3 countries, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, and Romania. And the selected retailers, the authorized retailers in this network, are directly supplied by this company, Danish Retail. So the selective distribution agreement, as it should do, allows cross-sales to other selected retailers, so between the authorized retailers in the network, and it prohibits to sell the contractual product to unauthorized retailers. However, what happens here in this case? It's very typical. In my experience, it happens a lot in practice. A Greek member of this network decides to sell huge quantities of products to a Romanian wholesaler who delivers them then to an unauthorized German retailer, or groups of German retailers who are selling at extremely low prices. So these products are sold back into the territory of the selective distribution system. And to facilitate the discussion, we put up a little map with, in red, the countries within the EU that are not covered by the selective distribution network. So the key question central here is, can the Danish retail company go against the Greek retailer? Let's first have a look at the actual practical relevance of this case. Maybe a question for Maria Rosa. Are you familiar with this situation? Is this a theoretical problem or not?
No, it's not a theoretical problem. I'm unfortunately very familiar with these cases, especially where the distribution system is very young and newly established and does not cover all the European countries. So this is very often one situation we have to face it.
Yeah, and so what makes these parallel imports that the Danish company dislikes so much, what makes it so attractive? Why does it happen?
Because of the cost then the products could be resell within the distribution selective areas by an authorized distribution. The authorized sellers and so organization has to be really performed and performing and respect the standard of the selective distribution. So the sellers or the manufacturer to select and create an effective structure has to impose, let me say, special criteria and standards that mostly are really expensive. So investments to be followed by all the companies in the selective distribution. This implies, of course, that the prices of the product that are moving and selling through a selective distribution system by the authorized companies are normally higher than the ones that could find by an authorized dealer or company that are outside the system.
Yeah, so it's a free rider problem more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so really this Greek authorized distributor who should actually he enjoys the benefits of the network, he's causing this mess, right? So what if the Danish retail company simply approaches this Greek retailer over a cup of coffee and talks to him about these supplies and, tries to influence a little bit his choices there? Maybe a question for Eric.
Yes, so we saw in the earlier panel that this happens, and in practice also, the German distributors who are within the network have invested a lot and will be very angry with what is happening, so they will call their contact and the contact will try to solve it. He will have a discussion, it happens. I would be very cautious under the old Weber in any ways to have this discussion because actually I think it's a Greek one is doing what he can and he's allowed to do. So in the discussion you need to be very careful not to insensitize or threaten with sanctions because that could turn against you. And in my experience, even if you have this very careful discussion, it will come back at you later on because the relationship will be very poor and the supplier will start to look at how does this distributor, the Greek distributor, pay on time and stuff like that. He will make remarks and we'll try to get him out of the system at a point. And when he does that, this discussion will come back. I think it often does. And the Greek distributor will say, you're not kicking me out because of late payments, but because I did something you didn't like, which I was allowed to do. So I would be very careful with such discussions, but they happen.
Yeah. And so maybe returning for a moment to Maria Rosa. So can the Danish retail prohibit this Greek distributor to supply these contractual goods to unauthorized distributors within the EU, independent of whether they're located inside the territory of the selective distribution or outside?
We saw in the previous panel that the Weber take a position really clear on this point. So Article 4 helps a lot. But unfortunately, it's not so easy to say, yes, they can do everything they want. So general contractual provision, we all know that prohibits clearly to sell in the system territory where is established a very clear distributorship agreements and are hardcore clauses. So they could be invalid, and this is one point. Okay. the Greek distributor is free to sell in the free territories, of course, so the ones that are not covered by the system, and this is not a problem. The problem is when there are parallel sellings and sales, and from one country that could be Greek, through Finland, through Estonia, through whatever you want, the product arrived in Germany, arrived in Italy, where the distributorship agreements and territory are very well structured. So the parallel imports, it's a...
Yeah, so the parallel imports are a real problem.
Yeah.
Maybe turning to Karsten. So what if the Danish retail company had obliged the Greek distributor to bind his customers in free territories, not to actively or passively sell to unauthorized retailers located in a territory where the Danish retail operates a selective distribution system?
Good question. I think if you find a clause like that in a distribution agreement, selective distribution agreement, at least under the previous block exemption regulations, this was null and void, because that block exemption regulation was very clear on that. The seller was not entitled to oblige the buyer to bind the customer to not actively or passively sell to unauthorized distributors in territories where the selective distribution system is operated. This was clear-cut, and such a clause would be null and void and would risk to be fined. So no way. Interesting question is, has the situation changed? But we will talk about that later on.
Yeah, so it sounds a little bit like the Greek distributor and the Romanian wholesaler and the unauthorized German retailer benefited a little bit from a loophole, if you could call it that in Weber, no?
Yes, is that question to me or is it?
Yeah, of course, go ahead. Oh, no, actually, no. I'm asking it to Eric. Sorry, I looked at you. Because you're my neighbor.
I had no idea.
But Belgium is also a neighbor to the Netherlands, so go ahead, Eric.
Yes, we're all friends, but I think that question has been answered yesterday by Jonathan, I think, who was not representing the Commission, but clearly indicated that they considered it to be a loophole, and I learned it was actually a loophole created by the old Weber before the previous situation, but still he closed that loophole, and my guess is that when creating that loophole, the Commission didn't particularly think of the fact that it could really harm selective distribution to an extent that was not acceptable.
I can answer the next question.
No. I think I'll skip you for... No, but anyway, I believe everybody's waiting for the good news. So did the new Weber 2022 present as relief here?
To me?
This time, yes.
Okay. My impression is that the Commission this time was listening to the complaints by the industry about loopholes in the Weber, in the old Weber, and because of that, I think there are some good news, because this problem seems to be covered at least to a certain extent. Why? Because under Article 4, I think it's C, which covers selective distribution, there's an exception of this hardcore restriction, of this territorial hardcore restriction, which says, yes, the seller, the supplier, is now entitled not only to bind its customer, but also the customer of the customer, not to actively and passively sell to unauthorized distributors in territories covered by the selective distribution system. And that means for our case, yes, Danish retail can bind the Greek distributor, to bind the Romanian distributor, not to sell to unauthorized distributors in Germany. Yeah. So the problem now seems to be solved, at least, yes, at least for the future.
Yeah,
And maybe,
I was going to say, is it really? Because presuming that a lot of parties in the market don't have clauses in their agreement that are null and void and subject to fines, how do you go about getting the protection that the new Weber provides the supplier?
Now is the chance to draft the new agreements and study the new structural situation from the manufacturer to the end customers, and then to try to bind a lot of situations like the one that Kirsten just mentioned. But I hope that this could be really a good challenge that every manufacturer will take, and take the opportunity also to review the previous agreement that will continue to run till the end, and so they have the opportunity and time to study and to draft the most convenient clauses in order to take all the good situation, the new protecting rules that are in the Weber, and so to make more efficiency.
Yeah, so it does sound like you need an amendment or to enter into a new agreement upon expiry, so it might be a bit of an implementation to carry out. Yeah, and if you don't do that, you don't get the benefit of this fix in the Weber. All right, and so are there alternative ways to overcome the problem? So say you're either not in a position to amend these agreements because the distributors are on long-term agreements and refuse. You know, this is not something that necessarily benefits them, right? So how, what alternatives can we think of, Eric?
So we are in a position where we have an existing agreement which prohibits sales within the territory. And the best way forward is, and I will just underline it because it's a lot of additional paperwork, but it is the moment to review your contracts and do it and send us the work. But it is the moment. But if you don't want to do that because the relationship is opening a box of Pandora, you will need to find other ways. And I think a previous panel approached this already and said, well, appointing in this open territory, Romania, and perhaps the other three countries, the three countries that are remaining, a selective distributor. So that kind of closes the loop. And then you have two other alternatives, is either now based on the new Weber reserve a territory or appoint an exclusive distributor. But I have two comments. One, there will be agreements where this possibility was not contemplated. So also this possibility will have to be a change in your agreement. So you will have to negotiate anyways. And the second one was also addressed, the comment this morning, is passive sales remain possible. So you will have this problem of passive sales. What is it? In my experience, as soon as you ask the question, what happened here, it's a passive sale. It's always a passive sale. So it will, and I think we approached this also this morning, how to demonstrate that it was not a passive sale and so on. This is a complication. So three possibilities: appoint a selective distribution, that's the best one. And then if your contract allows it, somehow appoint, reserve and appoint an exclusive distributor. Appointing an exclusive distributor has now the advantage, thanks to the new Weber, that this exclusive distributor will be prohibited to sell actively and passively. So that's also an improvement. Yeah. But still, there is leakage, if I may say so.
Yeah, and I think having selective distribution in the entire EU is usually the best way to go, because it makes everything easier also in trademark cases and so on. But for young systems that are still expanding, or there are situations where that simply is not possible. So let's spend a little bit of time also on the actual enforcement itself. So what are the legal actions you can take trying to enforce a situation like this?
Yes, so again, here we are talking about the situation where you have inserted this clause. and something, and this Greek distributor still goes ahead. And I think we have two scenarios here. Is one, he's actually breaching his own contract. Yeah. He's knowingly selling something to the Romanian without telling him you can't resell it. Or his good faith, he sells it with the proper clause in his contract, and the Romanian does whatever he wants with it. So first one is your own distributor is in breach. That's kind of a easy way forward because you have your contract. You can, a lot of jurisdictions have this kind of reciprocity. If you breach, I'm not obliged to comply with my obligations. You could suspend sales, put him under pressure. You can go, and I think it's a serious breach of contract, actually. So you could also try to terminate it. It will be better to clarify that in your agreement, that it's a serious breach, but per se, it seems to be a serious breach because it can harm your selective distribution as a whole. And then you have the more difficult one, is when actually your distributor is in good faith. He sells it with a proper clause, and the Romanian goes rogue on him. This one is difficult in the sense that you don't have a contractual relationship. I looked a bit at whether unfair trade practices could be helped under Belgian law. They can't. It's a contractual matter under Belgian law, so you can't go directly against the rogue wholesaler there. But I was thinking of inserting kind of clauses where you have a transfer of rights, because this morning the panel also said it's sometimes really difficult to kind of get your own distributor to do with a good client of him to the necessary notices and default measures that he would stop it. So it's difficult. Yes, yeah. It's a difficult conversation that this distributor doesn't want to have. So you need to find a way to draw that to you and to be able to act. And the thing I thought of was already providing a transfer of right, because it's a right, you can transfer it under Belgian law. And see whether you can have a system where you give a notice to this Romanian saying, the right has been transferred, I can go against you. It would be a direct, but we'll see whether it works. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe some comments from Karsten.
Yeah, maybe
after
first
that,
of all,
Maria
Eric
Rosa.
is the guy to be addressed to if it comes to enforcement, to litigation. He's a litigator.
I'm especially broke.
Yeah, but I would like to add a question maybe. We have heard about the EU Commission was prepared to cover the loophole. I was commenting on that and I was saying, yes, to a certain extent, the loophole is covered. But imagine the situation that the Greek is not allowed to deliver the goods to the Romanian distributor without binding him not to actively sell to unauthorized distributor in Germany. The Romanian then, says, I have understood that. I will supply and deliver the goods to another Bulgarian distributor. Yes, and the Bulgarian distributor then decides, they are Germans and they are keen on having these products. They would like to sell it for a cheaper price. What then? It seems that this situation is not yet covered. And I wonder why. Because, as Fabio said, from an antitrust perspective, there is maybe no sense at all to bind the customer of the customer, but not the customer of the customer of the customer. That doesn't make sense to me. So the loophole is not really covered if it comes to an abuse of this selective distribution system. That is always possible, and they will find ways to circumvent the new solution given us by the Commission. That's what I expect, and then the whole problem starts again. Funny.
Yes.
We are halfway through.
Yeah, and the problem is always in the evidence, because that
yes.
Is a valid point that was made earlier as well. Maria Rosa, do you have any further comments?
No, I was wondering if you think, is it possible to bind the customer, so the end customer, through the purchasing agreement so for a period of time, or not to sell the product, of course, to another end customer in a particular state or within 1 or 2 years? Because this was a case that probably will happen, and I already faced.
Yeah, did you mean the situation where a customer that presents himself or herself as an end customer starts reselling, or?
Yeah, because Kirsten said it's not possible to bind the customer not to
Correct.
sell.
Yeah.
But of course, you can't. Generally speaking, you can't. But for special products, probably in the purchasing agreement, you can bind the customer, not the end customer. So, Kirsten, not to sell that product in certain territories or within 1 or 2 years.
Go ahead, Carsten.
To protect, of course, the distribution and the products.
This is a question which we have not discussed before, so it's an interesting one, and I try to give an answer to that, and then I leave it to the audience maybe to add. From the wording of the block exemption regulation, which says it's now allowed to not only bind the authorized distributor, but also its customers. Its customers. The question is how we define customers. The wording only says customers. It doesn't differentiate between resellers and final customers. Yeah. So one could take the view that this encompasses also the final, the end customer. And if that is true, of course, I could say, oh, this guy ordered last time 100 pieces and this time 1,000 pieces. Maybe something is wrong. I will tell my distributor to bind that final customer because there is a risk that he wants to deliver 900 pieces to Germany. So this is my answer for the moment by the interpretation of the wording of the Weber.
Yeah, but there's always a risk if you start limiting sales in any way to end customers, that can be hardcore restriction. So you have to proceed with care.
That's a different story. Yes,
yeah.
You cannot limit or bind a person, a distributor, to distribute to end customers.
Exactly.
That is true. But maybe you can bind the distributor to bind the end customer, not to deliver to unauthorized distributors.
Of course, because the end customer should not be in resales in the first place. So I actually had a case that was exactly like this, where it was very difficult to get the party who we thought was reselling to, of course he wasn't going to admit doing that, but looking at the quantities, it was impossible to draw another conclusion.
Yeah.
That can be very tricky. Yeah, any more comments? Otherwise we'll proceed to our questions round. We would like to open it up to the audience to ask questions and engage in conversation with the panel. Are there any questions? Because otherwise we have a few questions on the board that we can also address. There's a question in the back. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Ah, he's the one.
Congratulations for the case that is very complex and very interesting. But I see all this discussion with the side of the internal lawyer, and to me it is quite difficult to establish a real enforcement binding the unauthorized distributors to receive the goods first, because this is a possibility to insert a clause in selective distribution contracts, and the first answer that a normal distributor that has no this clause in the contract is, I don't want this clause in the contract. The contract is perfectly in force, is binding me and you, and I don't want this clause in the contract. So in my opinion, the first problem is, the first question that probably my general manager will ask to me is, how can I bind my distributor using this new regulation?
Terminate.
And you perfectly know that we can discuss.
You signed.
Yes, we, the lawyer, can discuss about violation and not violation of contracts. Our managers, our commercial, discuss about profitable and not profitable distributors. So this is the criteria.
Yeah.
And a profitable distributors, even if he's a not compliant distributor, is a distributor. This is quite simple to say, but it's not quite simple to do. Anyway, do you retain that a note to all my distributors saying there is a new regulation, there is a new that is directly applicable in the EU legal framework. And this regulation allows me to bind you to resell only to selective distributors. So a circular letter, let me say, to all my distributors, and you, from this moment, are binding also to this, because there is the law, not my contacts, could be a solution. Because this is the first solution that probably we will be asked for our managers.
Do you want to respond?
Maybe
Go
Eric,
ahead.
the one.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I don't know, whether you have a good relationship with your distributors, but sending out a notice saying that now you can prohibit or insert such a clause will draw their attention to the fact that they actually can do it under the current contract. So you might trigger some reactions there, because in the end you will need to get an agreement with your existing distributors or terminate them to enforce this. I don't think if you haven't a clause going a bit forward in this way, you will not be able to actually enforce it, and you will, with such a notice, draw the attention to this. I think a proper way forward would be perhaps to say, there is this new Weber, and we must reconsider your agreement, because there is stuff in this that's not possible, and although it's a bit more flexible, that we need to review it and then try to slid it in. That's my 2 cents on that one.
And maybe one observation from my end. You brought up a very valid point that sales are sales, and so it also depends on your reasons for initially implementing the selective distribution system, and you see a variety of different drivers behind that from different suppliers, depending on the products, depending on whether they're new in the market or whether they're already established. And sometimes you also see that initially they enter the market, want to sell a lot, but still build up a selective system. But then when the market matures, they might want to not, let's say, have a high volume of sales if it means that its products are sold in, less of a quality environment, or, of course, there are also pricing considerations and free riding problems too.
Maybe also from my side, 2 comments. A circular letter in itself would not be sufficient, because we do need a mutual agreement in order to amend the selective distribution agreement. How to amend? The answer by Eric was, be careful, because then your distributors will know about the loophole, and maybe they will try to make a benefit out of that. Yes, could be. Another way I experience is if there is something you really would like to implement, think about, are there other things which could or should be implemented in the selective distribution agreement. And then you say to your distributors, yes, it's time. For 2 years ago, we had amended the agreement. Now the 2 years are over. Let's amend again. I have a couple of points. I will send you the new version of the contract. Yeah, please sign and send it back to me in a week from now. And you don't mention that there is one of those amendments, the one you really would like to have. Yes, and that can work.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
I think we should...
it's time.
Can I only make one conclusion? That it has become more and more complicated when the Commission tries to solve problems, and particularly those difficult problems of relations between different networks. At the end, it's becoming a bit more like I don't know, a game where you have to find out the road, and so it becomes impossible to understand for non-lawyers. it gives us the occasion to earn some more money, perhaps, but that's not the purpose, I think. And so the whole story that it must be only in the territory covered, I think, is nonsense. If I may be very frank, the person of the Commission already went away. He doesn't hear me. And I think that is a big problem. But on the other side, we cannot do otherwise than try to adapt ourselves to these situations. And I think you have done a very good job. And now we will have another big issue with NENA, which is the issue of organizing selective distribution network through exclusive distributors, which I think is a normal practice, and the Commission doesn't understand that it exists. It must exist. It is a good practice, but we'll see. Okay, thank you very much.
I didn't have my glasses.
Moi, je le parle parce que ma femme est argentine. Alors, on va voir ça. Moi, je tiens beaucoup à cette question parce que avec impatience.
C'est juste, on est là pour réfléchir.
Mais oui, on est ici pour ça. Hein? Bon. Janine. Switzerland. Where? Which part of Switzerland? Zurich. Zurich. Marvelous city. Like very much. Okay. Good food. Yeah?
But you have good food in Italy.
Yes, but I like everywhere. So to try.
In English.
Except the English food. But now it seems that now they have recovered. It seems that they have a bit recovered. At least they have all the food from other countries.
Exactly.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
A lot of Indian.
Yes.
But the idea of the English was you don't live to eat, you eat to live. So you should not. But now it's changed very much. I am taking a lot of recipes from The Guardian.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Okay.
Nena Bella. Ah no, I must present a bit. Sorry, but allora, here we have Maria Elena Giorcelli is one of our partners, and she is working very much for an Italian company that is reselling perfumes and other things like that from mainly French companies, I think. So she has showed me a lot of these contracts where an exclusive, because they is working for an Italian exclusive distributor. So these contracts where an exclusive distributor creates and maintains a selective network. And she can show you how this works and how it is important because a smaller company cannot organize a great network all over Europe, I think. And so it's a nice system. Then we have Jean-Philippe Arroyo, Carsanti Associé, Paris. Janine Redemont, Niederkraftfrei, Zurich, wonderful. And Sam Villas Garrigueso, a colleague of our friend, come si chiama? Rossio. Perfect. I forget the names, you know. I'm very sorry. I don't forget things which are important, but the names at my age, it's terrible. Okay, sorry. Vai,
Yes.
Maria Elena.
So we can begin our last panel discussion of the day. And I will present you a very, very common business model, particularly in the perfumes and cosmetics sector, the one applied by our Parfum Marianne. So Parfum Marianne is a French company, a French manufacturer of perfumes that has established in France a selective distribution network for distributing its product. And it wants to extend the selective distribution network in other countries. And so what does it decide to do? Parfum Marianne appoints in each country exclusive distributors. The exclusive distributor have to select retailers, appoint them, and check that they comply with the criteria set by Parfum Marianne for being part of the selective distributor network, and this throughout the agreement, and also supply them for the products. This is an incredible investment for the exclusive distributor because it has to visit constantly the retailers, train them, and then visit them again and check their compliance. And of course, they are willing to take over this investment, but they want something in return. So, as many exclusive distributors do, the one of Parfum Marianne, what do they ask? They ask Parfum Marianne to prohibit all other distributors of the different countries to supply their selected reseller. Well, Parfum Marianne has some doubts. Can I do that? I'm not so sure. But what I will do is that I will prohibit the distributors to actively sell in the territory of other distributors. Well, this raises some issues, of course, of compatibility with the EU competition rules. It raised them already with the past Weber, but notwithstanding these issues, well, the market has not considered this because Parfum Marianne, of course, is a fake, but in the last 5 years, I have seen so many exclusive distribution agreements to distributors that had to build, manage, and supply a selective distribution network, and there were so many provisions trying to find a protection of the exclusivity of the distributor, which I shall show you by way of example in the next slides. So, here a first example. The distributor shall not actively seek customer for the products outside the territory. The distributor agrees to take whatever steps are necessary to be certain that the retailers do not sell the products outside the territory. Then we have a French agreement. Le concessionnaire s'interdit expressément d'exercer les droits concédés directement ou indirectement en dehors du territoire. Le concessionnaire s'engage expressément à faire respecter par ses sous-distributeurs l'exclusivité territoriale qui lui a été concédée et à leur interdire de se livrer à une politique active de vente hors du territoire. In the same agreement, le concédant, so the supplier, s'engage à faire respecter par le tiers l'exclusivité accordée au concessionnaire en interdisant la prospection et la vente active par le tiers sur le territoire. And then a recent agreement of a few years ago, if the territory is located in a country that is within the EU, the distributor shall not actively solicit or accept any order for products from any person or entity outside the EU. Any entity that is located in another country within the EU, unless it is an entity that is within the supplier's selective distribution network. And this can be either an approved retailer or a distributor appointed by the supplier. So these raises and raised some issues and keep raising some issue we have heard yesterday and we have heard this morning as well. How can we comply the market and business needs with the EU competition rules? Is there a solution? Is there not? We shall try to discuss it in this panel. And we shall discuss it with Jean-Philippe Arroyo, who shall present us the legal framework. We then have Janine Roy-Demond, who's from Zurich, and therefore shall present us the Swiss perspective. And then we, last but not least, Sam Villiers, who has the most difficult task, because you have to answer our questions and also provide us a possible solution, because we somehow have to give answer to the business sector on what is possible to do or not. So, Jean-Philippe, the floor is yours. Should I? No. Shall I go?
Yeah.
Okay, you can tell me.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I thought it useful to get a comparison between the old regime and the new BER to have an idea of the solution, because the issue here is that we have some difference between the general idea of the Commission to more protect more the exclusivity and the selectivity in the new provisions, and what the Commission says in the guidelines on the issue of the combination of exclusivity and selectivity. So I will not read all through all the provisions, of course, but and it was very well presented this morning. But so first, we have the definition and the new definition of exclusive distribution, which now includes the restriction itself of active sales, whereas before there was no such definition. Sorry, next. Yeah. And the most important provisions here are Article 4. And so I try to compare both versions of the former and the new provisions, and I think that we can find a way in the interpretation of the new provisions to combine slightly, let's say, exclusive and selective distribution. Let's go maybe directly to the next. No. Yes. To the guidelines, because here that's the wording of the former guidelines on the combination of selective and exclusive distribution, which were quite clear, saying that you can't combine selective and exclusive distribution because, so let's say that it's possible if active selling in other territories is not restricted, which means that de facto in practice, the main interest of exclusive distribution did not exist. On the other hand, it was completely possible, and it's confirmed also today in the guidelines, to have a commitment by the supplier to supply only one distributor in a territory. It's also possible to keep a location clause saying that the distributor must sell the products in an establishment approved by the supplier. And so it was possible before in this way, and mainly in the automotive sector, because as you may know, until 2002, it was a usual distribution system to combine selective and exclusive distribution. And so until now, we could see such a system with only a commitment by the supplier and the possibility to include a allocation clause. Today, so we have the new guidelines. The new guidelines, as a first view, seem to confirm that nothing had changed. But I think that it's important to really carefully read the guidelines, but more importantly, the BER. Because here, as you can see in paragraph 236, it's written that it's impossible to combine exclusive and selective distribution in the same territory. So that's the first point, which is important in our case, I think. And so it says that it's not possible because this would involve hardcore restrictions, like restrictions of active sales to territories or customers that have not been exclusively allocated, which is a very important point, I think. It would imply restrictions of active or passive sales to end users, or restriction on cross-supplies between distributors. And here, it's quite interesting to read this paragraph in the light of the actual wording of Article 4C. So if you can come back to yes. So here, as we can see, in comparison with before, we have an explicit provision saying that it's possible to include restriction of active sales by the members of the selective distribution system and their direct customer into a territory or a customer group allocated exclusively. So it's written explicitly, and it is also confirmed in Article 4C3, where it is indicated that it's possible to restrict active or passive sale to end users by members of the selective distribution system operating at retail level without prejudice to Article 4C1. With these provisions, I think that we can interpret the provision saying that it's possible to prohibit active sales to end users in a combination of exclusivity and selectivity. The only thing which is important, of course, and which is the same as before, is the prohibition of cross-supplies between distributors. And I think that this interpretation, because if we go back to 236, so we have the first obstacle, which would be the fact that the combination of both would derive on to restrictions of active sale to territories or restrictions that have not been exclusively allocated. So I think that we can consider, as a contrary, that if we have territories exclusively allocated, this part of the guidelines are not relevant. And the second part is restrictions of active or passive sale to end users. And here again, we could see in Article 4C, it's clearly explicitly say that it's possible to restrict active sales to end users in the territories which are exclusively allocated. So that's an interpretation which can be, I think, and please, next slide, by paragraph 223 and, no, 229, sorry, 229 and 234, which confirms the interpretation of Article 4C 1 and 4C 3. And again, we are here to think, to try to find solution. I'm not saying that it's necessarily this interpretation, but I think that we can discuss and work on it, even if the general stance of the Commission is combination of exclusive and selective distribution is not possible. But again, the wording of the regulation is different than before, and I think that we could support this argumentation, but happy to discuss.
Thank you. And Johannes is not here today, but...
Actually, yes, I asked the question yesterday, and first he replied, okay, and 5 minutes later he said no.
To me it said no, absolutely no. But we are here to discuss it.
Yes.
Janine, what about in Switzerland?
Yeah, I will tell you a bit about the Swiss law, which was exempt from the conference so far. But yeah, you may think, why is this relevant for me if maybe I do not have a distributor in Switzerland who is active in Switzerland? And anyway, you think probably, or that's also what Jean-Philippe told me, like it's anyway the same rules. So what are the differences? Why should it be relevant? I can say it can be relevant because not in every case the result will be the same. Because although our courts always emphasize that we should use the same rules and not be stricter in particular than the EU. There were some recent cases in which exactly this happened, that we applied stricter rules. And so it can be relevant for you also if you do not have a distributor in Switzerland, because as soon as there is a possible impact only on Switzerland and on the Swiss market, so even then, if the practice has an effect in Switzerland, then Swiss law may apply. And this was also, you may recall, the GABA case that was decided in 2016. There it was an Austrian manufacturer and distributor of the Elmex toothpaste, and he was interdicted to sell to other territories than to Austria, and Switzerland was actually not part of this agreement, kind of, but still they decided it can have a potential effect, because if they may not sell, even not passively, to Switzerland, of course it's a problem. And yeah, with respect to the application of Swiss law, I would also just make a short other remark that is not really related to the case, but do not forget about Switzerland, because we had a recent case where even a law firm had reviewed the agreement, and they regulated only sales in a selective distribution system with respect to the EU and the EEA, and Switzerland is neither part of the EU nor of the EEA. So our Comco did not really like that clause, and they intervened. So just as a fact to remember. Yeah, then I think we come to the case. We have, with respect to territorial restrictions, I think we have indeed a very similar regulation as the EU. We have it's regulated in Article 5 of our Cartel Act. There, paragraph 1 provides that agreements that significantly restrict competition in a market for specific goods or services and are not justified on grounds of economic efficiency, and all agreements that eliminate effective competition are unlawful. And with respect to the elimination of effective competition, we have, with respect to vertical agreements, paragraph 4, that says it is presumed that competition is eliminated in the case of agreements between undertakings at different levels of the production, and in case of agreements contained in distribution contracts regarding the allocation of territories, to the extent that sales by other distributors into these territories are not permitted. And the sense of this paragraph 4 is in particular that passive sales may not be restricted, neither to retailers nor to end customers. But you can also, because it's only a presumption, you can, of course, prove that it does not, your agreement does not eliminate competition, but then it still qualifies because it still usually qualifies under the paragraph 1 that I mentioned before as a significant restriction that you still need to rectify on grounds of economic efficiency. And so these are the regulations on the territorial restrictions, and then we have, based on our Article 6, the categories of agreements that are exempt and because they are considered justified on grounds of economic efficiency. And there we have on the next slide, this brings us to our guidelines of the COMCO on the general notice on vertical agreements. In German, it's the Vertikalbekanntmachung, the VertBK, it's shortened here. So this is essentially our Weber. So if we, in our case, it's not about the restriction of passive sales, it's only about the restrictions of active sales. And there we have two rules that are relevant in this case. The first one prohibits if you have a restriction of active sales to end customers by authorized dealers at the retail level, you cannot do that. And the cross supplies that Jean-Philippe already mentioned, we have that as well. Any restriction of cross supplies between authorized dealers within the selective distribution system, they must be possible. So Swiss dealers, they should be free to purchase from other authorized dealers outside of Switzerland, and the procurement from non-authorized distributors, this may be prohibited. And I just want to mention that under Swiss law, any country that is not allocated neither as selective or exclusive, all of these dealers are considered authorized dealers. So in our case, and based on these two rules we have seen in literature C and D of the Vertikalbekanntmachung of our general notice, block exemption notice. Based on these, it's quite clear in the guidelines and in the explanatory notes that when it comes to a combination of exclusive and selective distribution in a territory, then it's usually a qualitatively severe agreement if active selling is restricted. So it would be unlawful, and in particular, it's also mentioned there that if you combine exclusive distribution at the wholesale level with selective distribution at the retail level, which is, I believe, exactly the case in our Parfum Marianne case, then this would likely not be allowed. And I do not want to anticipate the solution that Sam is going to present to us in a minute, but I think I I would agree with what he's going to say about EU law, that it would also apply to Switzerland.
Yes, please, what can Parfumerian do, and what are the solutions that you have envisaged?
Okay, thanks very much. I think first I came across an interesting document a number of weeks ago, which I think gives a little bit of flavour as to the practical significance of this. It was even sort of, I think, made clear to the European Commission in their staff working document from 2010, which are always fun documents. If you think the VIBA guidelines are long, this document is very long, but deep within it, it talks about the public consultation and various participants in the stakeholder workshop involved basically said that on this very question, that there was insufficient guidance on the circumstances in which exclusive and selective distribution may be combined in the same territory, but at different levels of the supply chain, without raising concerns. Respondents argued that exclusive distribution at the wholesale level and selective distribution at the retail level is commonly used as it reflects the most efficient way of putting certain goods on the market, and so they asked for a clarification. Now, of course, we have a clarification now, but not one I think that these respondents would like. And even there was a report actually in 2021, the expert report on the review of the VIBA, where Contrast concluded that generally, even under the previous VIBA, exclusivity and selectivity at different levels of trade is not possible due to the restriction in relation to cross-supplies within distributors. Now, when we look at the question here about, well, can these exclusive distributors be fully protected, or can they only be protected insofar as active sales? I would say usually not. Why usually? Because, well, I mean, I think it's always important to know that we don't have all the context of this Parfum Marianne. It could be a very small boutique perfumery, in which case it could possibly benefit from the guidelines on effect on trade or the de minimis notice. So I think it's always worth actually thinking before we fly into the VIBA. It's like, well, hold on, does it even fall within Article 101 in the first place? And it may be too small of an issue. I mean, if EU-wide revenues are under 40 million, maybe there's not going to be an issue. So that's why I say the usually not. But I think, as Jean-Philippe was saying, I think that the Commission have now made much clearer in the new guidelines that in recital 236, that the combination of selective and exclusive distribution in the same territory cannot be exempted, and also recital 236. And this leads us to, well, what can we do? What are the possible alternatives? So the Commission actually, they suggest some alternatives at recital 236, and they say, well, you can commit to supply only certain authorized distributors, for example, in certain parts of the territory where the exclusive distribution is operated. And also Parfum Marianne could commit to not make direct sales to a particular territory itself. But I'm not sure this is necessarily what is being, this is the idea for Parfum Marianne. It seems that it sells perfumes in France through selective distribution, and it wants to expand. So one option is to really keep the same structure, where you have one distributor per country, maintaining the selective distribution model at the retail, but of course with the freedom of distributors and resellers to cross-sell across national borders. Now, of course, this may not be the ideal situation for distributors because they have no protection. It may give them insufficient incentives. So this is kind of this is one option. You could say, look, you can absolutely, if you want to have your own if you want to set up distributors in various European countries, go for it. But you have to at least on paper, allow them to cross-sell. Parfum Marianne could also, if it wished, but again, this is more of an onerous task, is to set up their own subsidiaries in various European countries and operate simply pure selective distribution, So you'll have Parfum Marianne France, Parfum Marianne Germany, Parfum Marianne Romania, and then that's one solution. Because I think at the end of the day, probably bearing in mind that this is perfumes, and that I would say that the luxury aura is the sort of the important thing here. So it's really the selective distribution, I think, that is probably the most key element of this system for Parfum Marianne, rather than necessarily exclusivity for the upstream distributors. But then also the VIBA and the guidelines also allow for a mix and match approach between various markets. Whether we think that this could be useful for Parfum Marianne, possibly. For example, if it wants to move into certain markets where there is maybe not a huge uptake, it could decide to have exclusive distribution in those markets, and maybe in more mature markets, it rolls out selective distribution immediately. And so what would happen is that under the VIBA 4CI1 and the guidelines 229, Parfum Marianne could restrict members of the selective distribution system to actively sell into the territories covered by exclusive distribution. So that would mean that in these new markets, where there is no selective distribution, you perhaps have one main retailer in the city center of the main capital, that they would be at least protected. And then at the same time, Parfum Marianne could restrict the exclusive distributors and their customers as well from active or passive sales to the unauthorized distributors in the territories covered by selective distribution. Whether this would be something that would work for Parfum Marianne, we don't know, but these are some of the options, and I think we're very keen to hear if there are other solutions to the issue. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yes. Should you have any solutions to suggest, please do. We are open to discuss, to questions. I think that this is one of the points or the issues where the new VIBA left the business needs quite disappointed, left the request unanswered, and the problem was presented to the Commission, and we are still in a grey area. What do you think? Any questions?
Can I say one thing? Yes. I think that actually one could perhaps go to court and explain that the exclusive distributor is not a member of the network, because actually the network members are defined as those who are selling in a certain way to the end user, or generally he's not more selective distributor than the supplier himself. He takes the same role of the supplier. So I think there should be some space to convince that that is a different question. What can we do in practice? I think we can use the system of distributors. Perhaps we write a clause or we don't write a clause on active sales, and we explain to our exclusive distributors that if they are going to actively sell in the territory of their neighbors, we will be very unhappy. And that's, no, I'm sorry, that's the only way when the Commission does not recognize something that is perfect, that is logical, that is not contrary to the competition rules, then the only way out is trying to do this. It's not fair. It's like with the problem of price. Certain aggressive pricing you cannot accept in any case, but you will try to find a way. but it is, I think, a responsibility of the Commission that does not understand certain needs and forces us to do things that we should not do and that we don't like. The important thing is that our clients must know what is forbidden, what is not forbidden, and take the necessary precautions. So what I wanted to say, within selective distribution, there is such a strong link with the network that you can try to convince people that they should follow certain lines, even if you cannot oblige them officially. So, but that's a very free and unpolitical position. But if you have better solutions, like you have tried, can be. And also, I think if a case comes to the Court of Justice, the idea that actually the clause saying that it applies to everybody at every level is a wrong clause, because there must be a distinction between those who organize a selective distribution network and those who are parts and who are selling because they are selected to be sellers in this network. I think this is a difference, and they don't accept it. Okay, sorry, that's my... Nena, shall we... question, sorry, I have interfered too much, as always.
If there aren't any questions, I think we can finish.
So we conclude?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I have to say up front, I'm not a lawyer. I'm representing a company which operates in Germany. Basically, we have an adhesive business, chemical business. So my question is regarding the definition of different distribution systems. So in the past, we used to use the term of exclusive distribution. However, sometimes it was misinterpreted by distributors themselves, because they immediately thought that it means that we as manufacturer are prohibiting to ourselves actually to sell to their territories, since they are exclusive. And to, let's say, circumvent that, we used the wording of sole distribution, which is mostly existing in the British legal system, but somehow not that clear in EU, as I understand. Now, with this VBR 2022, it looks like the definition of exclusive distribution is different, and it means that this term sole distribution is basically not needed anymore, as I understand it, because exclusive distributor can be in number of 5 in the territory, including the supplier itself, right? Is that the right understanding now? Could somebody comment on that?
So, I think, sorry. As I said, I think that we can call exclusive distribution a system where the supplier commits not to deliver any other distributor in the territory. In practice, I think it's quite usual, and as I said, we can see it in the automotive sector. Now it's true that with the new definition of the BER, but it is the BER, the definition includes the restriction itself. So I don't know if we need now to remove the notion of exclusive distribution when there is no such restriction. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is the covenants and commitments in the contract, whatever the name of the contract and of the system. So, but it's true that I think it's interesting point, this change in the definition, which includes the restriction, whereas the main commitment from the supplier side is just to say, I won't sell to any other distributor than you in your territory. And I think that it is a kind of exclusive distribution.
Okay. no questions? It's time for lunch, I think, so everybody wants to. So I thank you very, very much. I must say, personally, I am very happy about how this part of our meeting went. I think we have been able to touch real problems, not to give a solution where a solution cannot be found, but in any case, we have much clearer ideas about what the problem is. The only conclusion is why make things become more complicated than they were, trying to make them more simple. And I think this is a bit something that sometimes happens, of course, it's only an advantage for us lawyers, but I think it should be more streamlined, these things. But anyhow, we can't do anything about it. We must learn how to cope with it. We must learn how to explain to our clients that certain things that seem perfectly normal are not admitted. But it's marvelous to have the occasion of discuss these things, of go more in depth, and I think that this was the purpose. Next year, we don't know where we will be, probably in Italy, but in any case, we will continue concentrating on these problems of the relationship between online and offline, and also all these problems, trying to follow the new developments, to see how it has been working with the new regulation, and I don't think there is a better idea. But we will try, and I count on you, as on everyone, for receiving any ideas, suggestions. We are very open. Then we may say, no, it's stupid what you are asking. We may come to that conclusion, but we will examine it with interest. And I must say that in most cases, what you can ask is not stupid, because most of you are in the business, know the reality, and so are able really to make proposals which are good for us, because we are the family of those who have these problems, and we must exchange this. This is one of the important goals of IDI. So thank you so much to be here, and you must come to the next meeting. We will do our best to make it as interesting as possible, to choose the best speakers, and to do as we have always tried to do. Thank you.